Hello everyone. Welcome to our group presentation. Our group name is the Five Musketeers. Consists of me, Hua, Janil, Jamil, Janita, and Alexandra. And our topic of talking for today is whether the state of Florida should decrease funding for the University of South Florida. Before we go into any detail, we would like to state clearly that our main position is that no, the state of Florida shouldn't decrease funding for the University of South Florida because it will negatively impact USF students for reasons which we will talk more in depth about in our later part of the presentation. Our intended audience is USF students, our professors, faculty members, and possibly Florida voters. For some background context, you may know that public school institution is not as affordable as it used to be, especially for low-income students or even middle-class family. Not to mention the fact that student debt is one of the main problems students face, which lead them to a bad financial being even after graduation. And maintaining a good study result during those 4 years will be even harder if placed in this situation. You can also notice that for research-based school like USF, in order to have a positive impact on society, funding is an essential. But also, the University of South Florida has been improving each year in every educational aspect, but the funding has not been increasing.
Our first claim comes from that state funding would further develop the educational achievements and key performances from students, creating and welcoming a better collective group. According to 2019 statistics, USF ranked as one of the top three performing institutions, and this was in part by 2017-18 45% decrease of average cost to students, which allowed that money to be given to students for scholarships, grants, and tuition. And this is a direct correlation to say that more funding allows student success because of decreased average costs. With more funding, there's a lower average of cost attendance, which allows the student to have that money given back to them for their education, which will, in response, help the university's achievements and ranks and records of improvement. More funding will overall cause more achievements, which will mean a continuous cycle for the USF's community of a better performance. And, quote, measured by this 10 metric performance funding model, the performance scores released this week by the board show USF improved in 9 of 10 metric over the previous year. All this to say that USF students' achievements will play a greater role in mandating a better and more well-rounded living community. The more funding that USF receives means the more money given to students for their education and for their achievements, thus allowing USF to be a greater community.
Our second claim is that more state funding for USF could be helpful for lower income students. Forbes magazine wrote that as of 2020, there are 45 million borrowers that owe nearly $1.6 trillion in student loan debt in the United States alone. According to the Institute for College Access and Success, the average student loan debt for class of 2018 is $29,200, which is a 2% increase from the preceding year. As of 2019, more than 42 million student loan borrowers have student loan debt of $100,000 or less, which more than 3.0 million student loan borrowers have a student loan debt greater than $100,000. The average student loan debt ranges from about $20,000 to $40,000, which accounts for nearly 9.5 million students across the nation alone. And lower income students have the most debt than any other population, averaging over nearly $200,000 of debt. Today, 66% of borrowers who graduated from public colleges have student loan debt. Average student loan debt at public colleges is $25,550, which is 25% higher today than it was in 2008. But why is that? The answer may be because of the decrease in state funding. According to the NPR, state funding for higher education suffered big cuts during the Great Recession, which contributed to tuition increases. The federal Pell Grant program, which helps students who display exceptional financial need, hasn't kept up with the increased cost of tuition. In many states, need-based grants and scholarship aid awarded by the state and public institutions don't make up the difference in tuition costs. A study done by the Institute for Higher Education calculated affordability by using the net price calculator on each school's website. Schools that awarded schools that awarded more aid based on lower income or demonstrated financial need ranked higher on affordability. Going back to the claim, the cuts in state funding resulted in tuition costs rising. The population most affected by this is lower income students, as they rely more heavily on Pell Grants. The Pell Grants of today do not cover as much cost than they did 10 years ago, which is extremely detrimental for those who are less financially advantaged. Overall, the decline in state funding has forced public universities to lean far more heavily on tuition revenue. Since the year 2000, public universities have lost about 25% of their state funding per student, which resulted in the average net tuition at public four-year institutions to rise by 136%. This is including the fact that students are having to pay more with less financial. A four-year public institution like USF receive an increase in state funding, tuition costs could potentially lower. With this decrease in tuition costs, it lifts some financial burden off of many students because they do not need to borrow as much in order to get an education. Lower income students would greatly benefit from an increase in state funding because ultimately it would mean less debt to pay off.
All right, so the third claim that we have in regards to not decreasing funding for the University of South Florida is that increased funding would help set an example and change the mindsets of institutions and people across the nation. Now, what I mean by that is right now there seems to be this idea that being expensive is seen as being good. And, as a student, you want to apply to the best colleges, you want to go to good schools. So as a result, colleges up their sticker prices, they up their tuition prices to look like good schools. And of course, that's only going to create a monkey see, monkey do effect as colleges and universities, will do the same to compete with other colleges and universities as they try to stand out and look like better schools. In turn, the price constantly increases, and in fact, according to Aaliyah Wong's article, six-figure price tags are coming to colleges. Surging sticker prices have already gotten out of control, and they will continue that trend as colleges fight to gain prestige. So increasing funding would help set that example and change that being expensive is good mindset because increasing funding would help set that example and change that being expensive is good mindset because as we've noted, we've seen the negative effects of decreased funding on tuition. We've seen how decreasing funding increases tuition and how that impacts low-income families looking to send their children to universities. And we've also seen how, more funding could provide a higher quality of education to students, increasing the number of achievements and successes. Now, if you can have a high quality education because you have enough money in your budget to allocate towards programs that are better for the students and opportunities that will enhance the students' learning, and you're cutting down on tuition costs, which is helping low-income families get that higher education that they need, you are changing that mindset from expensive equals good to high quality at an affordable price equals good, because people will look at USF and see the names coming out of USF and what they've been able to accomplish and what they've done, and realize that it's not about how much the school is, it's about what you can get out of it. So which all connects back to, why we shouldn't decrease funding for USF, as it could, really set an example and change things nationally.
My name is Alexandra Hoffman, and I will be explaining our rebuttal and conclusion. For our rebuttal, research has shown that some schools will not make changes to help out students and families by lowering tuition, even if the state has provided funds. Once the university has figured out their maximum tuition cost, they can spend that extra money rather than turning it back to the students and their families. A survey also highlights that the higher tuition is not equivalent to better quality education in the eyes of both Republicans and Democrats. Even though the university is not applying the state funds to lower tuition, students are still benefiting from wherever those funds are going to. Whether the funds go to academics, athletics, renovations, the students are still benefiting from those funds being provided to other sources that do not regard tuition. In conclusion, the state of Florida should not cut funds toward universities because it is negatively impacting the students' future. The cost of tuition is overwhelmingly high, making it inaccessible for many students. Every individual deserves the opportunity for higher education and should not be torn due to the amount of debt they could possibly face. Not only do students benefit from the funds provided by the state, the university's platform benefits. USF is known for their research platform, which requires a lot of funds from the state in order to have a full functioning laboratory and healthcare providers. These type of universities rely on the state funds so that they can have enough equipment and do major stuff like cure diseases, innovative research, find vaccines. Increased funding will provide more opportunity to innovate things for our future.